The easiest way to hide the truth is to make the innocent doubt themselves. The bronze doors of the royal court groaned open as two palace guards escorted Evelyn Carter across the polished stone floor, every measured step echoing beneath the towering ceiling like the final seconds before a storm. Hundreds of eyes followed her, not with compassion, but with quiet judgment sharpened by weeks of rumors, whispers, and carefully planted lies. Noble families lined the marble galleries in silks embroidered with silver wolves. Elders occupied the elevated benches beneath banners that honored generations of alpha bloodlines, and attendants stood motionless along the walls as though even breathing too loudly might disturb the sacred order of the kingdom. Evelyn kept her head lowered, her pale hands folded calmly before her, despite the tremble threatening to betray her composure. She had learned long ago that fear only entertained those who wanted to see her broken. 3 years earlier, she had been rejected by the mate everyone insisted should have completed her destiny. Since then, every failure within her former pack had somehow found its way to her name. Crops that withered became her curse. Sick wolves became her fault. Misfortune itself seemed easier to explain if someone weak could be blamed. Today, that blame had reached the highest court in the kingdom. The murmurs rolled across the chamber like distant thunder. There she is, the rejected Omega. She should have disappeared after the rejection. Instead, she dares stand before the court. Evelyn heard every word, yet her expression never changed. Her grandmother had once whispered that dignity was the last treasure no enemy could steal unless it was willingly surrendered. She clung to those words now as the guards stopped before the circular stone engraved with the ancient crest of the moon goddess. The Chief Justice, an aging wolf whose silver robes shimmered beneath shafts of morning light pouring through stained glass windows, slowly rose from his carved seat. His voice carried effortlessly through the immense chamber. Evelyn Carter, formerly of Ash Hollow Pack, you stand before this court accused of dishonoring your pack, deceiving your elders, and bringing shame upon the sacred bond between wolves. Gasps rippled through the spectators, although everyone already knew the accusations. They had come not to discover the truth, but to witness humiliation wrapped in ceremony. Evelyn finally lifted her eyes. They were clear, exhausted, but unbroken. "I have never betrayed my people," she answered softly. Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet the silence surrounding her made every syllable impossible to ignore. A few nobles exchanged amused smiles. Others looked away as though kindness itself might be mistaken for weakness. Somewhere high above, hidden behind the ornate lattice reserved for royal observers, an unseen figure watched without revealing his presence. No announcement marked his arrival. No trumpet echoed through the halls. The kingdom believed its Alpha King was still weeks away on the northern frontier. That belief made every cruel smile below feel safe. The Chief Justice lifted a polished staff and struck it once against the stone. "Then let the court determine whether your silence is innocence." His gaze hardened, and the chamber seemed to grow colder. "Or whether today will finally teach every rejected Omega exactly where she belongs." The first witness stepped forward with practiced confidence, his polished boots clicking against the marble floor until he stopped beside the ancient stone circle where Evelyn remained standing alone. He was Marcus Holloway, a respected beta from Ash Hollow Pack, known throughout the kingdom for his unwavering loyalty to the elders. He placed one hand over the silver crest hanging from his chest and lowered his head respectfully toward the judges before speaking in a calm, measured voice that carried easily through the silent chamber. "I testify under the blessing of the moon goddess that Evelyn Carter repeatedly ignored the orders of our council, encouraged doubt among younger Omegas, and refused to accept the authority of her pack after her rejection." A quiet murmur swept through the audience. The accusation sounded believable because Marcus had always appeared honorable. Evelyn looked at him without anger. She remembered the winter when his younger brother had fallen dangerously ill. She had spent 3 nights caring for him while the village healer was trapped beyond the frozen river. Marcus had thanked her then with tears in his eyes. Today, he refused to meet her gaze. The Chief Justice nodded before signaling for the next witness. An elegant woman dressed in deep blue velvet approached with graceful confidence. Lydia Ashcroft, one of the senior advisors from Ash Hollow, offered a sympathetic expression that seemed almost convincing. "The court should understand," she began gently, "that we once tried to help Evelyn rebuild her life after her rejection. We offered guidance, work, and protection. Instead, she isolated herself and filled others with fear by insisting that truth mattered more than tradition." Several nobles exchanged approving nods. Truth was a dangerous word inside a room where tradition often carried more weight than facts. Evelyn slowly inhaled. She could still remember every conversation Lydia described. Except, none of them had happened the way they were being told. She had never rejected kindness, because none had been offered. Every invitation had come with humiliation disguised as generosity. Every promise had demanded silence in exchange for survival. Yet, she remained quiet. The silence unsettled more people than any argument ever could. The youngest judge leaned forward. "Do you deny these statements?" he asked. Evelyn lifted her eyes toward the panel. "I deny becoming the person they describe." Her answer was simple. No anger, no pleading, just quiet certainty. A few spectators frowned. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. It was easier to dismiss someone who shouted than someone who refused to hate. Across the upper gallery, hidden behind carved latticework reserved for the royal family, the unseen observer remained perfectly still. Silver eyes studied every witness, every hesitation, every carefully chosen word. Nothing escaped his attention. Below, another witness entered, carrying a sealed scroll bearing the official crest of Ash Hollow Pack. Gasps echoed as the document was presented before the court. The elderly clerk carefully broke the wax seal and unfolded the parchment. "This record," he announced solemnly, "contains the unanimous decision of the Ash Hollow Council, declaring Evelyn Carter responsible for bringing lasting dishonor upon her pack." The words settled over the courtroom like a heavy winter fog. The spectators seemed satisfied. Written records felt permanent. Official seals inspired unquestioned trust. Even those who had doubted the accusations moments earlier now appeared convinced. Evelyn closed her eyes for only a heartbeat before opening them once more. Somewhere deep inside, she realized this trial had never been about discovering the truth. It had been designed so that every answer she gave would strengthen the story someone else had already written. The Chief Justice allowed the silence to linger until it became heavier than the accusations themselves. Then, he slowly rose from his chair and extended one weathered hand toward the attendants waiting beside the chamber wall. At once, two women dressed in ceremonial gray stepped forward carrying a polished wooden tray. Resting upon it was the silver crest that had once marked Evelyn as a daughter of Ash Hollow Pack. Every eye in the courtroom followed the small emblem as though it carried the weight of an entire bloodline. "Honor," the Chief Justice declared, "is not inherited. It is protected through obedience." His words echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling, answered by solemn nods from the elders seated behind him. Evelyn stood perfectly still while one attendant approached her. The woman hesitated for the briefest moment before carefully removing the crest from Evelyn's cloak. There was no cruelty in the gesture, only reluctant duty. But the sound of the clasp releasing seemed impossibly loud inside the silent chamber. A wave of whispers rolled across the galleries. "She no longer belongs to any pack. She has lost everything. This is what happens to those who challenge tradition." Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the empty place where the silver emblem had rusted for years. She remembered receiving it as a child, smiling proudly while her parents told her that every wolf carried the honor of the pack wherever life might lead. Both of them were gone now, leaving only memories that no court could erase. One of the senior elders stood and lifted the crest for everyone to see before placing it inside a carved oak box. The lid closed with a quiet click that somehow sounded final, yet Evelyn neither protested nor begged. She simply folded her hands once more and breathed slowly, refusing to let grief become a performance for strangers. The spectators expected tears. Instead, they found quiet dignity, and that unsettled them more than anger ever could. Lady Lydia stepped forward again, offering a smile wrapped in false sympathy. "If you had only accepted your place after your rejection," she said softly enough to sound compassionate, "none of this would have been necessary." Evelyn finally looked directly at her. "Accepting pain is not the same as accepting a lie," she answered. Her voice remained calm, almost gentle, but the words drifted through the courtroom with surprising force. Several younger nobles exchanged uncertain glances. An elderly woman seated high in the gallery slowly lowered her fan, studying Evelyn with growing curiosity. For the first time that morning, doubt quietly entered a room that had arrived convinced of her guilt. The Chief Justice immediately struck his staff against the marble floor, interrupting the moment before it could spread further. "Enough," he declared. "The court will not permit speeches disguised as innocence." Another attendant stepped forward carrying a long scroll bound with dark blue ribbon. The royal clerk accepted it with both hands before reading aloud. "By recommendation of the Council of Ash Hollow, the court is asked to approve the permanent mark of rejection, ensuring that her disgrace shall remain recorded throughout the kingdom." The announcement settled over the chamber like a winter frost. Even some who believed Evelyn guilty shifted uneasily. Such a judgment would follow her for the rest of her life, closing every remaining door before she could ever hope to open another. Hidden beyond the carved lattice above the courtroom, the silent observer remained motionless, but his silver eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Until now he had watched without interference, allowing every voice to reveal its true nature. As the final recommendation echoed across the hall, something changed behind those steady eyes. The patience of a king was beginning to reach its limit. The courtroom remained frozen beneath an uneasy silence as the royal clerk carefully rolled the decree back into its ribbon, as though sealing Evelyn's future inside a document no one intended to question. Around her, conversations resumed in hushed whispers. Some nobles looked satisfied, believing justice had been served before the verdict had even been announced. Others avoided looking at the young Omega altogether, unwilling to witness what they assumed would become another cautionary tale whispered to future generations. Evelyn stood alone inside the ancient circle, the empty place upon her cloak feeling strangely lighter than the burden resting inside her heart. Losing a symbol did not erase the years she had spent protecting children during harsh winters, tending wounded travelers without asking for payment, or comforting frightened wolf pups when stronger wolves were too proud to show kindness. Those memories still belonged to her, even if the kingdom chose to forget them. High above the courtroom floor, concealed behind intricately carved oak lattice reserved for members of the royal household, a tall figure remained hidden within the shifting light pouring through stained glass windows. Alpha King, Adrian Blackwood, had entered the palace quietly before sunrise after returning from the northern frontier days earlier than anyone expected. Only 2 trusted royal guards knew he had arrived. Rather than announcing his presence, he had chosen to observe the proceedings unseen. His silver eyes moved from one witness to another, measuring every hesitation, every carefully rehearsed sentence, every glance exchanged between the elders of Ash Hollow. He noticed details others ignored. Marcus Holloway never once looked directly at Evelyn while giving testimony. Lady Lydia tightened her fingers whenever questions drifted away from the prepared accusations. Even the Chief Justice seemed unusually eager to prevent silence from lingering too long, as though he feared someone might begin thinking instead of simply agreeing. Adrian folded his hands behind his back. During years spent leading the kingdom, he had learned that deception rarely revealed itself through words alone. It lived inside nervous gestures, hurried decisions, and people who rushed toward judgment before allowing truth enough time to breathe. Beside him, Captain Rowan Hale spoke quietly enough that only the king could hear. "Your Majesty, shall I stop the proceedings?" Adrian kept his gaze fixed below. "Not yet." His answer was calm, almost emotionless. Those who believe themselves safe often reveal the most when no one interrupts them. The captain nodded and stepped back into silence. Below, another elder rose from the council bench carrying a velvet-covered case. He opened it slowly, revealing an elegant silver instrument reserved for permanent judicial markings. The object itself was simple, more ceremonial than threatening. Yet its appearance caused another wave of whispers throughout the chamber. Everyone understood what it represented. Once approved by the court, the declaration would follow a citizen's name in every official record throughout the kingdom. The Chief Justice accepted the ceremonial instrument with solemn respect before addressing the assembly once again. "Before this court reaches its final decision," he proclaimed, "does anyone present possess lawful evidence capable of overturning the testimony already given?" The question echoed through the vast chamber. No one answered. Marcus lowered his eyes. Lady Lydia offered a quiet smile of confidence. The elders remained perfectly still. Even the spectators seemed convinced that silence itself confirmed Evelyn's guilt. Only Adrian remained unmoved. He had already seen enough to know that truth was somewhere inside this room, but it was hiding behind fear instead of standing beside power. As the Chief Justice slowly lifted the ceremonial instrument to continue the proceedings, Adrian took a single, deliberate step away from the shadows, his polished boots touching the stone floor beyond the hidden gallery for the very first time that morning. The ceremonial instrument caught the morning light as the Chief Justice raised it with slow and deliberate care, allowing every person in the courtroom to understand that the final judgment was only moments away. The vast chamber became so still that even the soft flutter of banners hanging from the stone pillars seemed unusually loud. Evelyn Carter remained at the center of the ancient circle, with her hands quietly folded before her, her breathing steady despite the weight of hundreds of watchful eyes. She had long since realized that fear was exactly what everyone expected to see. If she surrendered to it now, their story about her would become complete. The Chief Justice looked down from the elevated platform with an expression that revealed neither anger nor compassion, only certainty. "The court has heard testimony from respected witnesses, examined official records, and considered the recommendation of the Ash Hollow Council. Unless lawful objection is presented, these proceedings shall now advance toward permanent judgment." His voice echoed across the marble walls before fading into silence. No one stepped forward. Marcus Holloway stared at the floor as though avoiding an invisible burden. Lady Lydia folded her hands with quiet satisfaction, believing the outcome had already become inevitable. Around them, nobles whispered to one another with growing confidence. Some discussed how quickly the court had reached its conclusion. Others remarked that tradition must always be protected, regardless of personal sympathy. Evelyn listened without responding. Instead, her thoughts drifted toward a simpler memory. She remembered sitting beside a quiet stream as a little girl while her grandmother placed smooth stones across the water one by one. "Truth is like this river," the old woman had said with a gentle smile. "People can throw stones into it, but eventually the water keeps moving, and every stone becomes visible again." Standing inside the courtroom now, Evelyn repeated those words silently to herself. They steadied her more than any promise of rescue ever could. At the edge of the chamber, attendants carefully prepared the ceremonial register that would record the court's final declaration. Fresh parchment rested upon polished oak, waiting for ink that could alter the course of a life with only a few carefully chosen lines. The royal clerk dipped his quill and glanced expectantly toward the Chief Justice. High above the assembly, hidden beyond the carved lattice, Adrian Blackwood watched every movement without speaking. His calm expression concealed the growing certainty forming within his mind. The testimony had been too perfect. The documents had appeared too conveniently. Even the pauses between witnesses felt rehearsed rather than natural. He had spent years negotiating peace between rival pacts and exposing ambitious leaders who mistook confidence for honesty. What he witnessed below followed the same familiar pattern. Captain Rowan Hale quietly approached once more. "Your Majesty," he whispered, "if we wait any longer, the record will be sealed." Adrian's silver eyes never left the courtroom beneath him. His answer came softly, yet it carried the quiet authority of someone who had never spoken without purpose. "Then we will stop it before the ink has time to dry." At that very moment, the Chief Justice reached for the ceremonial register and prepared to pronounce the words that would make the judgment official, unaware that the silence protecting the deception was only seconds away from being broken. "Stop." The single word rolled through the royal court with calm authority, yet it carried enough weight to silence every whisper before it reached the farthest marble column. The Chief Justice froze with the ceremonial register still resting beneath his hand. The royal clerk lowered his quill. Every noble, elder, and attendant instinctively turned toward the source of the voice. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoed from the upper gallery as a tall figure emerged from behind the carved lattice that had concealed him since dawn. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, catching the silver embroidery woven across a midnight black cloak. Recognition spread through the chamber one face at a time. Shock replaced confidence. Surprise became disbelief. Then, almost as if guided by the same heartbeat, the entire courtroom bowed. "Your Majesty," voices whispered from every direction. Alpha King Adrian Blackwood descended the broad stone staircase without haste. He neither raised his voice nor displayed anger. His calm expression alone commanded more respect than any shouted order ever could. Captain Rowan Hale followed several steps behind, while two royal guards quietly positioned themselves near the entrance without drawing attention to themselves. Adrian reached the courtroom floor and stopped only a few feet from Evelyn. For the first time since the proceedings had begun, someone looked at her without judgment, pity, or suspicion. His silver eyes simply observed her as though searching for truth instead of confirmation. Evelyn met his gaze for only a moment before lowering her eyes respectfully. She had never stood this close to the Alpha King before. Stories described him as fearless in battle and unwavering in justice, but none of those stories had prepared her for the quiet steadiness in his presence. Adrian turned toward the panel of judges. "I returned to the capital earlier than expected," he said evenly. "It appears my arrival was fortunate." No one answered. The Chief Justice slowly stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, we believed you were still inspecting the Northern Territories." Adrian inclined his head slightly. So did many people. The simple reply carried meaning that settled heavily over the room. His gaze moved across the assembled witnesses. Marcus Holloway swallowed nervously. Lady Lydia forced a polite smile that failed to reach her eyes. Several elders exchanged uncertain glances, suddenly aware that every decision made that morning now stood before the highest authority in the kingdom. Adrian looked toward the ceremonial register awaiting its final entry. "Has judgment already been recorded?" he asked. "Not yet, Your Majesty," the royal clerk answered carefully. Adrian nodded once. "Then no judgment exists." The statement landed with unmistakable clarity. He stepped beside the oak table. Lifting the sealed scroll that had been presented as unquestionable proof only moments earlier, instead of opening it immediately, he held it in his hand while addressing the court. "Justice is never strengthened by speed. It is strengthened by certainty." His voice remained calm, but every word settled into the silence with quiet precision. "I have listened to every witness. I have observed every testimony. Before a single line is written into the records of this kingdom, I will examine every claim myself." A wave of unease swept through the courtroom. The confidence that had filled the chamber only minutes earlier dissolved into anxious silence. Evelyn remained exactly where she stood, still saying nothing. Yet, for the first time that day, the balance of the room had begun to shift. Because the truth was no longer standing alone. The silence lingered long after the Alpha King finished speaking, stretching across the royal court until every person present seemed unwilling to become the first to break it. Adrian Blackwood carefully unfastened the ribbon around the sealed scroll and unfolded the parchment across the polished oak table. His eyes moved steadily from one line to the next. He did not rush. He did not search for confirmation. He searched for consistency. After several quiet moments, he looked toward the royal clerk, who verified these records before they were accepted by the court. The elderly clerk hesitated before answering. "Your Majesty, the documents arrived bearing the official seal of Ash Hollow Council. Under normal procedure, that seal is considered sufficient." Adrian nodded thoughtfully. Under normal procedure? He allowed the words to settle before lifting the parchment high enough for the judges to see. "Tell me, Chief Justice, when did the council submit this declaration?" The Chief Justice glanced toward the date written near the bottom of the page. 3 weeks ago, Your Majesty." Adrian's expression remained unchanged. "Interesting." He placed the parchment back on the table and gently tapped one corner with his fingertips. "Because 3 weeks ago, the Royal Archives issued a revised registry seal to every recognized pack in the kingdom." Quiet confusion spread across the courtroom. Adrian continued in the same calm voice. "This document carries the previous design, a seal that should no longer have been in official use." Several elders immediately leaned forward, studying the parchment more carefully. The royal clerk adjusted his spectacles before his eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "Your Majesty." "He is correct." A ripple of uneasy whispers swept across the chamber. Lady Lydia's confident posture stiffened. Marcus Holloway slowly lowered his head. Adrian shifted his attention toward Marcus. "You testified that this document was approved during the unanimous council meeting." Marcus swallowed before answering. "Yes, Your Majesty." Adrian asked another question just as calmly. "How many council members attended 7? Marcus replied almost immediately. Adrian looked toward the royal clerk. "Please read the attendance register submitted by Ash Hollow at the spring assembly." The clerk quickly searched through a leather-bound ledger before stopping at the proper page. "Your Majesty, according to the official registry, only 6 council seats have been occupied since Elder Thomas retired last autumn. The 7th position has remained vacant." A stunned silence followed. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, as though realizing his mistake too late to correct it. Adrian neither smiled nor displayed satisfaction. "Memory often fails those who rehearse events they never experienced," he observed quietly. His gaze then settled upon Lady Lydia. "You stated that Evelyn rejected assistance offered by the council after her mate bond ended." "Yes, Your Majesty," Lydia answered carefully. Adrian turned toward Evelyn for the first time since opening the records. "Miss Carter, where were you living during that period?" Evelyn answered without hesitation. "In my grandmother's cottage beyond Silver Creek." Adrian nodded once before facing the clerk again. "Please retrieve the relief registry." Within moments, another ledger appeared. The clerk read aloud. "The council officially recorded Miss Carter as residing outside Ash Hollow territory during the same 6-month period." More whispers spread through the courtroom, louder now than before. One of the younger judges slowly removed his spectacles, staring at the conflicting records with growing disbelief. The story that had appeared flawless only an hour earlier was beginning to unravel thread by thread, and with every quiet question the Alpha King asked, certainty abandoned those who had mistaken confidence for truth. The courtroom remained silent as the final words from the royal clerk faded into the towering chamber. No one hurried to defend the contradictions that had just been revealed. The confidence that had filled the room earlier had quietly disappeared, replaced by uncertain glances and lowered eyes. Adrian Blackwood folded the registry closed and returned it to the clerk with careful precision, before taking a few unhurried steps toward the center of the court. He stopped beside Evelyn, not in front of her and not behind her, but beside her, as though making it unmistakably clear that she would no longer stand alone while the truth was being examined. The simple gesture drew more attention than any speech could have. Evelyn remained still, struggling to understand why the most powerful man in the kingdom had chosen fairness when everyone else had chosen convenience. Adrian turned to face the judges. "This court exists to protect justice, not assumptions," he said calmly. "When testimony conflicts with official records, judgment cannot proceed." The Chief Justice slowly lowered his head. "You are correct, Your Majesty." Adrian continued. "Every accusation presented today relied upon certainty. Yet certainty disappears the moment facts no longer agree." He then looked toward Marcus Holloway. "You will have an opportunity to explain your testimony after a complete investigation." Marcus could not answer. His silence spoke more clearly than any defense. Adrian shifted his attention to Lady Lydia. "You also will remain available to the Crown until every document and every statement has been reviewed." The elegant confidence she had displayed throughout the morning vanished beneath a respectful bow. "Yes, Your Majesty," she replied quietly. Adrian then addressed the entire assembly. "No citizen of this kingdom should lose honor because others failed to protect the truth." His words echoed across the marble walls, reaching even those seated in the highest galleries. Several younger nobles lowered their eyes with visible regret as they remembered the whispers they had shared only moments earlier. Others exchanged uneasy glances, realizing how easily public opinion had accepted a story without asking whether it deserved belief. Adrian slowly removed the royal cloak resting across his shoulders. Woven from deep midnight blue fabric trimmed with silver thread bearing the crest of the crown, it represented the direct protection of the royal household. Without ceremony or hesitation, he gently placed the cloak around Evelyn's shoulders. A quiet gasp spread through the courtroom. The gesture was neither dramatic nor impulsive. It was deliberate. Evelyn instinctively reached toward the fabric, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed the embroidered crest. For the first time that day, warmth replaced the cold uncertainty that had followed her into the court. Adrian looked directly at the assembled judges. "Until this investigation is complete, Evelyn Carter stands under my personal protection. No council, no elder, and no official may question her status without the authority of the Crown." No one objected. No one even attempted to speak. The declaration carried the force of royal law. Adrian finally turned toward Evelyn. His expression remained composed, yet there was unmistakable kindness in his silver eyes. "Miss Carter," he said, quietly enough that only those nearest could hear every word, "the value of a person is never decided by the loudest voices in the room. Sometimes, truth simply arrives later than judgment." Evelyn looked at him in silent disbelief. Around them, the court no longer saw a rejected Omega standing alone. For the first time, they saw someone the Alpha King himself believed was worthy of dignity. And in that single moment, the story the kingdom had accepted for years began to change forever. The royal court remained standing long after the Alpha King's declaration, not because tradition required it, but because no one seemed certain how to move after witnessing the course of history quietly change before their eyes. Morning sunlight streamed through the towering stained glass windows, bathing the marble floor in shades of gold and silver that seemed brighter than they had only an hour earlier. Adrian Blackwood slowly turned toward the assembled judges, elders, and nobles. "The investigation will begin immediately," he said with calm authority. "Every record presented today will be reviewed by the Royal Archives. Every witness will be heard again under the protection of the Crown. If mistakes were made through carelessness, they will be corrected. If falsehoods were presented deliberately, the law will respond with fairness and accountability." No one questioned his decision. The Chief Justice stepped down from the elevated platform and bowed deeply before Evelyn. "Miss Carter," he said sincerely, "this court regrets that conclusions were allowed to grow faster than truth. Until the investigation is complete, every accusation against you is suspended." His words echoed throughout the chamber, carrying far greater meaning than a simple legal statement. The whispers that had once followed Evelyn with suspicion slowly transformed into thoughtful silence. Several nobles who had avoided looking at her earlier now lowered their heads in quiet respect. An elderly woman from the upper gallery pressed one hand gently over her heart, her eyes glistening as though remembering someone she had once failed to defend. Marcus Holloway finally stepped forward, unable to carry the burden of silence any longer. His voice trembled with regret. "Your Majesty, Miss Carter, I allowed fear to become stronger than honesty. I believed protecting powerful people would protect my family. I was wrong." Adrian regarded him steadily before replying. "The first step toward restoring honor is choosing truth when it is no longer convenient." Marcus nodded, understanding that forgiveness would require more than words. Evelyn listened quietly, feeling years of loneliness begin to loosen their grip upon her heart. She had dreamed many times that someone would finally believe her, yet the reality felt gentler than any dream she had imagined. Adrian looked toward her once more. "Miss Carter," he said, "your dignity remained intact because you refused to surrender it, even when others failed to recognize it. That strength deserves respect." Evelyn smiled for the first time that day, small but genuine, and the expression transformed her weary face in a way that surprised everyone watching. As the great bronze doors of the royal court opened, fresh spring air drifted inside, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers from the hills beyond the capital. It felt less like the ending of a trial and more like the beginning of something entirely new. Adrian walked beside Evelyn as they crossed the marble floor together, the royal cloak still resting upon her shoulders. No proclamation announced what the future would become, no prophecy echoed through the hall, yet every person present sensed that the kingdom had witnessed more than justice restored. They had witnessed a reminder that true leadership did not seek the easiest judgment, but the fairest one, and that genuine strength never needed cruelty to prove itself. As Evelyn stepped beyond the court into the morning light, she realized that the rejection defining her past no longer held power over her future, because the truth had finally found a voice strong enough for an entire kingdom to hear.